President Trump has described our next guest as a traitor after she and 5 other Democratic lawmakers shared this video on social media, urging members of the military to not obey unlawful orders from the commander-in-chief.
This administration is pitting our uniformed military
and intelligence community professionals
against American citizens.
like us. You all swore an oath
to protect and defend this Constitution.
Right now, the threats to our Constitution aren't just coming from abroad, but from right here at home.
Our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders.
Well, in response, Trump called the remarks seditious behavior, and he said punishable by death. The Democratic Congresswoman from New Hampshire, Maggie Goodlander, joins me now. She sits on the House Armed Services Committee. Thank you so much for being with us, Congresswoman. In an interview with Fox News, President Trump said he was not threatening death, but that you and your colleagues are in, quote, serious trouble. What's your reaction to what's happened since you made that video?
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. We love this country. My colleagues and I who joined together to send a simple message, a message that is rooted deeply in federal law and in our Constitution. We love this country. We love our Constitution. We all swore an oath to protect and defend it. I've taken that oath many times in my life, including when I swore an oath to join the Navy as an intelligence officer in the Reserve. I served for a decade. And I took the same oath when I joined the Congress in January. I think this is a moment for moral clarity and for legal clarity. And the idea that a statement of a bedrock principle of American law would unglue the president in such a way to make threats, violent threats against me and my colleagues, it's just not who we are as a country. It's not who we are as Americans.
We know that there are concerns about the safety of all of you who have been a part of this video. I wonder if you can share for us what it's been like for you personally since this happened. When
the President of the United States, our Commander-in-Chief, the most powerful person in the world, makes a violent threat against you, it has an impact. It has a ripple effect. And we've seen an uptick in political violence in this country over the years, but it's reaching a fever pitch, Chris, and it's something that every American should get behind, that this has no place in our country. And that is really my focus. I think this is an issue that should bring us all together, that threats of violence and political violence has no place in the United States of America.
But we know it has evoked quite a reaction from the administration and not just from the president. The White House press secretary also called you out directly at the briefing yesterday. Here's what she said.
Maggie Goodlander was a naval officer, and notably, she is also the wife of Joe Biden's national security former advisor, Jake Sullivan. And so these members knew what they were doing. They were leading into their credentials as former members of our military, as veterans, as former members of the national security apparatus to signal to people serving under this commander-in-chief, Donald Trump, that you can defy him and you can betray your oath of office. That is a very, very dangerous message, and it perhaps is punishable by law. I'm not a lawyer. I'll leave that to the Department of Justice and the Department of War to decide.
So obviously she's making the argument that you are the dangerous one. Clearly, you must have known that this was going to get some sort of reaction. And I wonder if you can help people understand why you and your colleagues felt compelled to do this. Why was it important for you to put this message out there?
You know, unfortunately, we're living in a moment, Chris, in our country's history where there are legitimate concerns about the President of the United States issuing unlawful orders to American troops on American soil. And you just take a look at the president's track record. You know, when I served in the Navy, I served under 3 presidents, under 6 secretaries of defense, including Secretary of Defense Mark Esper, who stood up to what he believed were unlawful orders to shoot at peaceful protesters and to invoke the Insurrection Act. That was important clarity that we saw. Today, we have court cases in federal courts across this country that are in which legitimate questions about the president's actions are being litigated in courts of law. And that's what happens in the United States of America. But I'll tell you, we have a Secretary of Defense and a president who are testing the boundaries of the law and putting our service members in an absolutely terrible position every single day. You know, the Secretary of Defense came before our committee, the House Armed Services Committee. I asked him a very, very simple question that has one answer and one answer only. The question was, will you abide by a decision of the United States Supreme Court if it is issued and you're asked to do so? And he refused to commit to that very basic principle. I think we should all be able to get around and agree upon a statement of federal law which is true, and the basic principle that we follow the laws in this country. That is, after all, the oath that we all have taken to this Constitution. It's an oath to the Constitution and not to any individual in particular. And that is who we are as Americans. That is so important for the safety of our country.
The streets that stopped clapping. The Remove the Regime protests in Washington, D.C. mark a turning point in Trump's presidency. Not because people opposed him, but because the opposition has matured into a mass movement that no longer fears his retaliation. Tens of thousands gathered, not out of partisan loyalty, but out of exhaustion, frustration, and a deep national embarrassment at what the presidency has become. Trump has always fed on fear of immigration, fear of criticism, fear of institutions plotting against him. But these protests carry a different tone. They are not scared of him. They are tired of him. And tired populations are far more dangerous to authoritarian personalities than hostile ones. Hostility energizes Trump. Exhaustion isolates him. The chant, "Remove the regime," is potent, not because it's radical, but because it labels Trump's presidency as illegitimate, in a way that cuts deeper than policy criticism. It frames him not as a leader, but as a distortion, a figure whose continuation in power is not a disagreement, but a danger. And for the first time in years, the protests are not merely reacting to Trump's actions, they are defining the narrative themselves. This terrifies Trump. His dominance depends on controlling the emotional temperature of the country. He must be the center, adored, hated, feared, mocked, but always central. But now, crowds gather without his invitation, without his framing, without his adversarial permission. They define the conflict on their terms. He becomes background noise. For a man whose political power is tied to attention, irrelevance is death. The movement also signals something deeper. The public no longer sees Trump as an exception to the democratic system. They see him as a threat to it. The impeachment calls are symbolic of a wider sentiment, a sense that institutions must be protected from the man leading them. Protesters aren't asking for policy concessions. They are asking for removal. That is the kind of shift no presidency recovers from. For the first time since Trump entered national politics, the streets have stopped clapping. They're not cheering him or jeering him. They're demanding the end of him. And he knows it.